Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. If you've been with us before, you know living a revenue culture means you're maximizing profits because you've optimized your people in a low friction context. If you just think about it for a second, you know there's no way you'll ever optimize your profits if your people are not optimized, if they don't know what's going on or they're too slow or they're doing the wrong things. And the only way you're going to get them optimized is put them in a low friction revenue context. And today, you're going to see some changes today. And one of those changes is just who our guest is. And our guest is going to talk about how organizations can make themselves a little more low friction. So I think that'll be one of the outcomes from today. The other, if you've been with us before, I'm now a co-host. And my co-host is Joshua. Joshua Toupalik, welcome.
Yep, thank you for having me here. Good to be here. Good to be a co-host now.
Well, not only is he a co-host, but he's my grandson. So when he says be here, he's kind of been here with me for a long time. But so that's going to be really special. He is, in addition to being the co-host, he's our AI guru and our digital marketing excellence guy. So he brings a lot to the table. You're also going to see changes in how we do these podcasts going forward. Just today, there'll be three of us. There may be times there's even four. And we're doing this as part of a support of a new revenue science community that we're creating. And I'm slow, but I'm persistent because I started this community in 2016 when we started certifying chief revenue officers and organizations in chief revenue officer thinking. But we're now at a point, partially due to Joshua's work in AI and building some structure, that we're creating a community. And we like to think of it as a professional community. And if you're going to be a professional, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, you have a community around you. You speak a common language, you have common resources, and you share back and forth with each other. And so that's what we hope this community is going to do over time. And it will be both practitioners, which Brad is a practitioner, as well as the people who hire or contract with the practitioners. Because if you've ever been in a medical situation, the more you know about what the doctor's talking about, the better you feel, and probably the better ultimate service you get, and you recover quicker. So we think this community should have both practitioners and the people who are hiring them or paying them in their salary. So that's going to be some of the changes. So welcome to this new version 2. And as I said, our guest today is Brad Cartier, and he is a theory of constraints expert. And I have been a fanatic on theory of constraints since the mid 80s. I think we can say, and Brad probably will talk a little bit about the theory of constraints starting from a book called The Goal. And if you haven't read it yet, go get it. I've read it at least 50 times. I've bought hundreds of copies and given them away to people because I believe this is fundamentally how we should approach business. And now having Brad as part of our community is just spectacular for me. So, Brad, welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be part of this new approach with expanding and building this big community. So being able to chapters and being a foundational, I'm really looking forward to the people I'm going to be working with and obviously this great opportunity.
So I would love to have you, there's two or three things really important I want you to share with us today. But the first one is share your journey. How did you discover theory of constraints and what's it been like to be in that community and have worked with the founder, creator of it and global work and all that type of thing? I'd love to hear your journey.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was I grew up in the Midwest in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I did what you were supposed to do, where, what everybody thought you should do is get an engineering degree and go work for 3M. So I went and got an engineering degree, and my first job out of college, of course, was 3M. But the interesting thing is as a senior, I had a professor who was heavily tied to Dr. Goldratt, the person who wrote The Goal and quite a few other books on his approach. And one of the things that they give out, it's very early on in one of Goldratt's books, PQ problem, essentially, which says, do you make and sell P products or Q products? And he gave it out in a class exercise. And, everybody gives all these answers, and there's basically six answers that most people can get, just because of the way the problem is set. Everyone else beyond that is just a bad calculation error. But, and me and another guy got the answer right, and he asked me to explain it. And I said, well, the first thing I asked myself is, do you have enough capacity to make all the P's and Q's for the demand for this scenario? And I said, clearly you had a problem. And I said, and then I had to figure out, do I focus more on P's or focus more on Q's? It's very interesting because when I read your book and you're talking about, the ideal customer and, how do we provide the value? This whole exercise is internally looking. It's just like, how do we make the most money making more P's or more Q's? Because we've got to cover our weekly payroll and all of that other stuff. So it's really interesting on how that, I started off in the exact opposite of the revenue game, but I got it right and learned a lot more about theory of constraints and stuff in his course and read, of course, a lot, The Goal and a bunch of Ellie's other books. And because I did well and stayed in touch with the professor, Dr. Goldratt used to offer this program for 2 weeks in the year. Because essentially, like in the revenue game, you create like you're doing with the culture. So I can really appreciate this. Ellie came up with a vernacular. A lot of people think it's cultish terms and things like that, but he came up with a series of terms and approaches. And, it's really interesting when you take something very scientific or highly logical and you see it break problems. So Dr. Goldratt created the conflict cloud. So he basically said, okay, your organization's in a conflict. It wants to make decision A or decision B. And then he created this elements to say, okay, my need for making the decision A is this, and my need for making decision B is this. And so this is why I'm forced to make one of these decisions. And of course, you see this happening in businesses all the time. Do I hold more inventory or less inventory? You're always oscillating. And it gets interesting when you start going, oh, this works in business, I'll bring it home. So if anybody's watching and you understand the conflict cloud that Dr. Goldratt built, don't use it on a spouse. It just doesn't work. You're bringing logic into an emotional situation, so don't do that. But anyway, Dr. Goldratt had said, hey, we're teaching all of these people. And so he offered this opportunity to come study with him and his accolades and, his colleagues and stuff for 2 weeks to really understand the processes, understand the language. And so when your spouse or, even a child or somebody came in and started using these terms and other things, he wanted to make sure you had a reference. So basically it was just like a little school. And then obviously he wanted you to learn how to apply some of the elements and techniques himself. And so right out of college, and thankfully 3M supported it, they let me go study with Dr. Goldratt for 2 weeks and learn a lot more about his processes and everything like that. And, obviously like meeting with you guys, I like networking. And so I got to know one of the partners at the Goldratt Institute, and we started talking, and I helped get a small project going in 3M, and we did some excellent things. And then 3M said, yes, but we're going to go, we're still kind of entrenched. We've been doing the same thing since, 1900 and old, 3M's old, very old and wonderful company. But, we're still, a new college kid isn't going to start changing big things across the whole organization, stuff like that. And the partner said, I'll tell you what, I could use you, come work with me. And so I immediately started working for one of the key partners in the Goldratt Institute very early, in my mid 20s, and just went on from there. And then I've worked with, all kinds of small companies that you've probably never even heard of, and, some very large ones like the U.S. Navy. I've worked in shipyards in their maintenance and repair organizations, turning around nuclear ship repair much faster, worked on their helicopters, worked on their planes, worked on heavy equipment, did all kinds of different things. Worked for Boeing, how do we apply it to the design process? And we saved them a couple $100 million just on the one design that I had worked on, the redesign of the 777. And we had multiple groups there that did some tremendous things, and worked for GM and plenty of their suppliers and a bunch, just all kinds of different things, and just been able to apply theory of constraints to both operations and manufacturing and distribution, as well as project management, because every organization has projects going on. Even implementing the revenue game
Yeah.
and becoming a CRO is a project in and of itself. And then obviously, if it's going to yield the results it does, you want those results as quickly as possible. So managing the project effectively and quickly is always going to be key. So done project management for BAE, again, creating systems that go into naval ships. So yeah, I've had a lot of ties in the aerospace industry and things like that, and the military. But yeah, so I just started consulting, and here I am all of a sudden 35 years later, still, working with a lot of the original people who got involved in theory of constraints in the late 80s and early 90s. And then obviously I love expanding with groups like you guys with the revenue game and stuff, because I think there's a natural fit between the two. So theory of constraints focuses on how do we improve operations? How do we improve flow through the manufacturing distribution chain, the supply chain, or even how do we complete projects at a much faster rate? So again, we're offering more value to our customer, which again ties right into what we're talking about, is how do we provide more value to the customer? Customers don't want projects 6 months late. Customers don't need their naval ships returned 18 months late. They want them, when we plan for them. So, obviously, I think there's a natural fit between the two elements. And one of the things we always looked at too when we were improving operations, it was one of the things that Dr. Goldratt had always imparted on all of us is when you improve a system, do not lay anybody off, because, you want to ensure a system never improves again. Just remember, oh, the last time we improved the system, my buddy got laid off, my father got laid off, you do not do that. So then when we improve the system, then we immediately need to say, okay, now what's the value to the customer? And then we need to go into the customer base or find new customers, to say, hey, we've improved this. We've moved essentially what has been constraining us in growing from internal operations to external. Now, what do we do about it? Now, no doubt Ellie and other TOC practitioners have come up with some solutions again, but primarily they're more operationally based. Like, if you're really good at delivering products on time, or, you're really good at managing your inventory so you never stock out, well, a vendor managed inventory situation may be a great opportunity for you to go in and say, hey, we're going to manage your inventories for you because we can manage them better than you can. We're getting rid of the customer order lead time. We're getting rid of a lot of these other things. We're speeding up our whole process to deliver to you. But, as I read the Smart Rev and learned more about what you guys are doing and everything else, there's just clearly a much broader approach to how we create more demand for our companies. And more importantly, like theory of constraints seeks to align everything operationally and create a low friction environment operationally. I mean, it's a perfect passover to, okay, now how do we link that right to a low friction sales process, right? So then all we're doing is looking at, okay, we got an opportunity to increase demand. Great, let's figure out what operations need to increase. And then you just continuously grow the company, knowing that you have the ability to put the gas on operations and the gas on sales whenever you feel like it. And then obviously, if you're really smart, you'll never have an internal constraint, because as long as you know you can go create demand, you should never be internally constrained. I mean, that's one of the things most people can get out of the book, The Goal, but the goal teaches you when it is internal, how do you manage it? But the reality is, if you're really managing a company well, somebody like Elon Musk, I mean, he goes out and constantly gets the best people. And I'm sure he's fine with some people being idle from time to time because he does not want to be internally constrained. He constantly wants to go figure out, he wants to manage the business and manage the growth. He doesn't want to manage constraints.
Brett, you
Most
just mentioned
organizations do
you
want
just
to. look at where's our constraint, and they took that from the, which is proper. The goal says, hey, where's the constraint? Okay, go. Now we have a process to fix it. But the reality is that an excellent business who can constantly create demand at will should never worry about an internal constraint.
You just mentioned something that when I read the goal the first time was one of those like you just sit straight up and go, what did I just read?
Yeah.
And that was the idle piece,
Yep.
where I at that point in my life I'd worked at Pontiac Motors and tool and die shops and a variety of places where we're building stuff and somehow the culture in those places was nobody should ever be idle and every machine should just run full speed all the time.
Yep.
And so talk a little bit about the idle and the buffers and that so people can kind of visualize what you're sharing.
Sure. So it's because I'll tell you, that's one of the things that really helped me make my decision to unfortunately leave 3M. But because I'll never forget, they sent me to one of the plants not far from where I grew up. And when I was talking to the manager of the plant, he had this whole series of books behind him, and they were listed Cost Center 1, Cost Center 2, Cost Center 3. And I just kind of looked at them. I mean, again, this is me fresh out of college, and I was very fortunate enough. Although I got to tell you, I have struggled over time because like when you read the book and went, aha, I learned this. I did the PQ problem. I instinctively knew what the questions were that needed to be asked, even at a young age. And I'm like, it's a cost center, right? It costs us to run money. I go, but obviously in the revenue generation game, you have to say it the other way. Like, no, it generates revenue. I mean, if the cost center's not running, you're not generating revenue. I mean, I get it. If you're putting it in stock and it doesn't move, technically it's not really generating anything, but you've generated potential revenue, but which is a bad thing. I'm not saying anybody should stock a lot of inventory, but that was one of those things. And so, yeah, I think the best way to kind of describe what you're talking about is one of the things the goal looks at is, in lean, and everybody thinks about Toyota production system. When I don't know, most people don't understand or have not heard the story, but when you go to get a job at Toyota, they tell you immediately, you have a job for life. Your job is to come in every day and figure out how to do whatever you're doing to go at quicker and faster and more efficient. That's your job. It's not whether you're turning the dials on the equipment or moving apart from one. That's not what it is. You are born into this company and you owe us to make it as efficient and Toyota took 30, 40 years of daily constant culture building to be able to eliminate as much variation as possible. Well, guess what? We're in America. We have variation. We haven't employed that whole concept. We don't have this. We're willing to hire you for the rest of our life, the rest of your life. And so, we do have a lot of variation. And then when you go in project management organizations, it's inherent with variation, right? I mean, there's just so much variation that goes. And so Ellie's whole approach was, well, how do we deal with it? Well, there has to be an understanding that we need protective capacity in the system. Now, it doesn't need to be everywhere. Realistically, there are probably some natural pinch points that exist in the organization, our constraints, if you will. And those are the points that we use for our control to make sure that we don't release too much into the system, right? We want to control what's going into the system because otherwise, what we have is if we release everything, everybody's always busy and priorities are constantly changing and nothing really gets out because everything's desynchronized. Everybody's busy, so we're making money. And that's one of the biggest fallacies I think that most people misunderstand. And it's a natural human behavior. If not everyone is busy, we're not making money. And that's just not true because there's variation. Sometimes I'm going to be more busy today and less busy tomorrow. And let's just go with that fact. But as long as businesses think everybody has to be 100% busy all the time, or we don't make money, we really can't get a good flow. And, that's the thing I love about what you do with Smart Rev is you start aligning the whole organization to what does it mean that we're doing today for our customer. So if I'm not doing something that adds value today to the customer, I might as well be idle, right? Because I'm going to distract or I'm going to cause inventory or I'm going to cause a bad decision or a bunch of other things. But if I can stay aligned so that every day I know I did well for the customer or I didn't do well for the customer, then we know we've got the system fully in check. right? And so one of the things theory of constraints looks at is, hey, you really should have protective capacity built in there. And one of the things that we do is, let's say in production, we'll add a production buffer in there. So basically what it says is if I know I can turn around something in 5 days, I don't promise everybody 5 days because I'm going to get peak demand and not so peak demand. So I need some additional time to protect myself. I also know that from time to time, I may have a supply problem here and there. And so what I'm going to rather do is say 5 days, I'm going to ship everything in 10 days. It's kind of exaggerated, but it just makes it pretty easy that I've got 5 days to make sure that none of my mistakes ever break my commitment. Because again, if you think about it, especially in Smart Rev, I want to make sure I'm meeting my commitments first. And so when I commit to a guy in 10 days, I want to make sure he gets it every time he flips the order switch. It's 10 days, it's there, right? So that's where I'm adding value to them. They can count on me. That's one way I'm adding value. I'm sure we're working on a lot of other things to ensure that they understand the value we're providing, but being late is not value, not in any way, shape, or form. And so what we do is we, in Kanban and Toyota production, they built space buffers to make sure that there was a little bit of inventory. So as machines didn't work or they're going through a changeover, other machines are still working and there's space to provide areas for product to go. And then when the machine's back online, it starts working. And then when the other one goes down for a turnover or something, then you start depleting the inventory. Dr. Goldratt said, hey, instead of space, let's just use time. And so let's protect ourselves with time. And so both in project environments, production and distribution, same thing. We'll call it an inventory buffer. So we want to protect ourselves from peak demands. That's all we're really trying to protect ourselves. That was one of the interesting things I struggled with at 3M. They put me on a project to decrease inventory. I said, hey, along with that, one way we could decrease inventory is we produced some of our key products twice as frequently. So rather than making a 3-month batch, we went to 1-month batches. And we said, now that we're 1-month batches, we can reduce our inventory in the system, our safety stock. And they said, no, you can't. I said, yeah, we can. They go, well, why? I go, well, that was based on we replenish every 3 months. Now we're replenishing every month. I don't need safety stock to protect me from 3 months. I only need it for 1 month, right? So we said, okay, now the stocks, the safety goes down. Same thing as your production environments gets more and more robust, my time buffer from 5 days may go to 7 days or 8 days, or the lead time goes from 10 days to 7 days or 8 days. I only need 2 or 3 days, right? As I get more and more control, as I'm dealing with less and less variation, I put the controls in. And then the other thing that I'm doing that a lot of people forget, and the goal is, well, it wasn't probably as in-depthly articulated, but the reality is when we're measuring how many times we go red into the buffer, that we're really late into the buffer, we go late, we check off why. Why did we do this? Why was it late? What happened? And now we can start to see again what's in our process that is causing the big hits of variation that we can go solve those. And again, it gives us a priority. So in lean, you think, nothing against lean, basically manufacturing engineering degree. That's what I took was a lean degree. But lean will go in, hey, I can make this process go 5 minutes faster. Okay, but what's the impact on the system? Everybody should always be acting like that. What's the impact on the customer? Okay, in my mind, it costs me less, right, to run it. So again, it's internally focused, it's not customer focused. But at the same time, maybe I just should have the guy standing around more, which I don't need, or he's just going to create more inventory at a faster rate, which I don't need. And so there's a lot of things you've always got to align. So when I'm looking at lean improving everything, it's like, no, 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 no. I need to figure out what is causing my delays. If I can start figuring out what's causing my delays, do a nice Pareto analysis, then I can hit, and we'll tell our clients that work on the big one first, just knock it off, just figure out how to block it from ever happening again. Okay, great. Now we go to the next one. Whereas if you say, hey, we've got 15 of these, it's like, yeah, but which one has the biggest? We don't need 15 improvement projects. Nobody does, right? Let's focus on whatever efforts we need again on what the customer needs, not what we're trying to do. But so let's just focus on one at a time. Everybody's already still plenty busy, but let's focus on one thing at a time, get rid of it, and then see if we can reduce our times and see if that translates to better customer service or something we can leverage on behalf of the customer. right?
Brad,
So
one of the things you said about the Toyota way, where they define the employee's job as constantly figuring out how to do it better and better and better. And then you compare it to the traditional US, where if I have free time, I'm probably over in the corner playing cards or,
yep.
doing sleeping if I can find a place where I can get away with it. And it's interesting. That's probably where you get this difference. I want them busy so that they're not playing cards or sleeping. Where
Right.
the Japanese, the person's actively trying to figure out how to improve the quality or the overall process.
Yep.
And as you're describing this, so much of theory of constraints applies to consulting projects as well as manufacturing projects.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I look forward to your insights on.
Yeah, I mean, for again, any consulting project is a project in and of itself, right? So then anything that you can do to make sure that the client gets the benefits sooner and faster. So the focus really needs to be what changes need to be made, how do we get them implemented, how do we get the right metric aligned, right? And then we go more into a reinforcement and a compliance. I mean, I know compliance is a bad, Dr. Goldrat has a lot of bad terms. People don't like, you know, step one, identify the constraint. Step two, exploit, which just means put your lean on it and everything, right? Don't waste the resource. That's really what
Yeah.
exploit means. A lot of people think, oh, it's a bad term, but that was very diligent in the terms they used. Exploit means don't waste it. Squeeze the most out of it, get the most out of it. And it's not taking advantage of people. And yes, they may be the people who don't get to go take a nap as frequently in the plant and everything else. But the other thing is, if you know where the constraint is too, it also should know where your overtime opportunities might be or where your cross training should focus on first, right? So, if there are, or if somebody does have some additional time and they are a bit of a garage engineer or mechanic, right? Like, and it's, a work center on the floor, something like that. Like, what can you do to kind of think about how to help that part of the organization? Like, this work center always seems to be a little behind the rest of it. And I worked with a company that built playground equipment up in Minnesota, and that was what was amazing is they got their schedule. They were so good at timing their manufacturing that they could tell which work centers were going to run out of work that week and when. And then they could plan activities for these people to go again. And it took them about 6 months, but their biggest problem was their changeover of their paint line, switching from a yellow paint to a red paint. Not so bad, but changing a red to a yellow can really mess things up when you're going from a dark to a light. But,
Yeah.
so they created this playground. It was hilarious because they made playground equipment. They go, here's our lean and engineering playground. And you could go in there and you could log your time in there and just say, hey, here's the experiments I want to work on and see what I can do. And a bunch of guys got together because they realized, hey, the paint changeover line is the most difficult thing that we deal with. And in 6 months, they came out with something. It took the changeovers down to a third of what it was prior. And I mean, that again, a lot of people don't like driving past a park where everything's all yellow, right, or all red. So having multicolors and everything else really enhance their value to their customers. So being able to say, hey, and build a playground by playground at a time instead of a bunch of yellow parts and then go, oh, it's 5 for this playground and 8 for this. They're like, okay, now they were able to build by playground, right, and build by job. And so all of the jobs, it was very easy. Yes, we got all the parts, they're all painted multicolored because they wanted 16 colors at that park and make it super beautiful. And so all of those different things. But yeah, it is really, like you said, some people just want to go play cards or the other things. The reality is, I don't think most people want to do that. Maybe when you're pushing your retirement, you got a year left. But the reality is, I think most people just want to feel valuable, and that gets pressure on the leadership team, right? Like, hey, we know these guys should have downtime. Now, what do we do with them? Because if we give them a paintbrush or a scrub brush to clean toilets, they're not going to run out of work. They're going to slow down real quick. And now we're never going to know where our protective capacity is because they're like, I'm going to run at half rate because the last thing I want to do is scrub a toilet this afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. the things you're talking about absolutely have an impact on quality and profitability, but they also have a huge, and you just said it, impact on culture
Yeah.
and people's. When I worked for Pontiac Motors, and long story, but union rules said if one shift worked 80% overtime, the other shift had to. And I'm never going to forget coming in on a weekend, and my boss said, take your jackhammers and go up to this deserted part of the plant and dig a hole. And we said, well, how big a hole? He says, the exact size you can fill in tomorrow on double time. And that was our version of cleaning toilets.
Yeah.
I mean,
Busy work. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean there's a bad policy, right? And obviously that's one thing all improvement activities and certainly Smart Rev does is stop doing the bad stuff. Yeah, and that's just a bad policy. I get it that some people wanted the opportunity to do more overtime, but there has to be a better way, but it wasn't simple. And unfortunately, we try to oversimplify things, and I'm sure you've heard the same thing too. I was shocked getting out of college. Every once in a while, I'd hear the phrase, ain't shipping to my house. I'm like, what? I just, and again, when I think of everything I've understood about Smart Rev, that is just such a disconnect that how do these people not know what's important to the customer? And so that concept should never come out of, anybody's thought process. Like, it's not shipping to my house, so I don't need to. No, 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 no. But again, that's on the company, right? To creating the right culture, that taking it from what the customer sees as value and hauling it all the way down to the point that even if it is my job to scrub the toilets, how do I make the guys happy?
yeah,
There has to be some sort of connection. How do I make the guys happy so they're doing their job the best? And then the customer gets it, and eventually I go from toilets to washing dishes in the cafeteria or something. I don't know, but
yeah, yeah, whatever it is,
there's a progression that I understand what's important to everybody throughout the CEO of my company, but more importantly, how we're impacting the customer and how that drives the benefits of our company by being great at what we do for our customers.
yeah. So talk a little bit about, and you've interwoven it beautifully. Thank you. But talk what it was about to go through the the program for combining your historic practice with the Smart Rev practice, so that now you're a deployable partner. What was that like for you to go through that?
For me, to be honest with you, it may be a little different because it kind of fills a hole because I was never really considered an expert at selling and marketing. Yes, I do consulting work and everything, but a lot of it is word of mouth. It's like, hey, you did good here. Talk to this guy, So I kind of lived what you guys talk about, that I always provided value to my customers so they would introduce me to other people I could provide value to. But, there were a lot of times where I think I could have extended my stay and extended my value, which is the most important thing, right? Because I would add more value to my customer that, hey, once I create an operational effectiveness or efficiency or whatever it may be, okay, now I could immediately go and say, there are some things we experimented with and I tried and I had some pretty good success with some sales approaches and things like that. But now I have a system, I've talked about this. There are constraints and lean are systems that you implement. And when you get everybody aligned with that, the system starts to improve. Everybody gets happy just because they're working in a more improved system, ideally a more logical system, because everybody, when you're focused on costs or a bunch of other things, you make some irrational behavioral decisions. But now the reality is like, oh, wow, now there's a process for me to just go and say, hey, here's an identifiable written about process and everything else. I'd like to introduce it to you and take you through it because then we can get back to what I talked about earlier. Let's put our on the sales process. Oh, we're internally constrained. Okay, I can still be on call. It's just, I don't have to be a consultant every day, but I can go, okay, what happened? Oh, good. Your smart rep worked. You increased the velocity of what's going, what the requests are, what your demand is. So now what do we do? All right, internally, where are we stuck? You know, okay, go back to the 5 steps. Where are we constrained? Okay, okay. Now, and after about 3 or 4 years, you're going to, again, not constant need of billing and being on site, but just, hey, quarterly, let's meet, or, monthly, let's meet. Where are you at now? Oh, you stuck in Smart Rev. Okay, let's go fix that piece. Okay, now it took off. Okay, now you're stuck inside again. All right, where are we stuck? All right. And it's just this, how great would it be to just to watch somebody help, double and triple not only their growth, but when you use theory of constraints too, we tend to see a 300% growth in sales yields a much higher net profit because you start to leverage, you start to know where your constraints are, you start to know that not everybody's constantly busy and where we can move resources and other things. And so for not tripling the cost, for a lot less increase in costs, I can still get my 300% increase in revenues. And then obviously Smart Rev, I'm sure, I know has opportunities for you to get more value with the same type of sales. But obviously that's just a clear communication that yes, we both agree we're providing you this value. And more
Yeah.
importantly, again, like I talked about, we're going to be consistent on our delivery. Why? Because we have controls in our operations. More importantly, if you're part, I know this and I haven't experienced it yet, and I'm sure you just haven't alluded to it, but you still are going to have probably customers that you will never fail on, right? And then others that because you're their second supplier or some of the other things until you work into that, you're going to be like, okay, if I'm going to be a day late, it'll be the guy who I'm a second supplier to. But the guy who we've got this whole process built and we're aligned and we're business partners, I will do it, I will drive it myself before I'm late, those types of things. Because,
I,
we value these people because they value us.
I love what you said about drive it yourself. My dad was a manufacturer's rep in the automotive space, and many nights
Yeah.
we had a whole bunch of parts in the back of the car, and we're driving them someplace so the line didn't shut down.
Yeah.
So I have experienced that one personally.
Yes.
Um, and the other thing I would think about, if I understand my constraints, when I do a joint statement of work with my client, I'm going to be much better at defining the work that we're capable of and matching that to the highest value the buyer would like to receive. So I don't end up with a contract where I promise something I can't do, or I
Right.
underpromised what I could have done if I'd really understood what my process behind it was.
Yeah, and I think the latter is the key point there too, right? Because, a lot of times again, when you don't follow the Smart Rev process and you just have a standard sales process, right? Like 3M or Procter and Gamble or somebody, they have a standard sales process. They will just blindly send out coupons or they'll just have a huge sale. And manufacturing and distribution looking at them like, why are you selling these things? And like, well, what do you mean? And like, you told me to make thousands of part A. Yeah, they're still sitting there a year later. And now I can't keep up with part B and you just had a sale on it. Why would you just have a sale? So again, that's not necessarily the problem because the problem is if I go to the customer and I want to sell him A, but he's all over me about B, then I also know like, okay, hold on, we're going to come back in a month. Well, why? I got to go get my stuff straight and I got to increase my capacity because before I offer you B, I better know you're going to buy 30% more than I'm currently selling and I'm barely keeping, my head above water. I need 30% more flow
Yeah,
and I'm going to get that before I come to you, right? And so, or the same thing, like, hey, or I'm sure if you're trying to, do you sell these other things? Like, hey, yeah, more importantly, I'll give you a discount on some of these other things because there are slow movers or something else. But at least now I'm moving inventory that I want to get moved to. And it's like, so now it's a win-win because I will make sure I've got the capacity because we're doing our statement of work and I know exactly what your demand is going to do to me. So I better be prepared for it. But then, I can also maybe slide you some good deals so you're
yeah,
overall more comfortable with me because maybe I'm paying a little more for my B product, but these A's that you got laying around, I'm happy to take them and you're happy to discount them a bit because I don't have some sales guy going, oh, I don't get my commission on discounted stuff. It's like, well, that's not how we work anymore, right? The Smart
yeah,
Rev says, no, we're providing this customer a bunch of stuff and here's
yeah.
how the whole system is aligned. And that even means some of our good slow moving stuff. So we're like, hey, good, both. But we've got to fix, yeah, like you said, we've got to fix and deliver what their key demand is for sure.
Well, Brad, this has been really, really good, and
Spectacular.
yeah. And so, Josh, do you have any last questions, or would you like to start to share a little bit about the community before we run out of time today?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit of the community, but I just wanted to say, I mean, everything that Brad just had to say, I was just sitting here in awe, just, absorbing all the knowledge and everything you were saying. So I mean, you have a lot there that I think is very valuable to our viewers. So just thank you for all that. That was
Like
very
I said, I'm
special.
just really proud to be asked to be part of your guys' community. So what you're going to talk about next, obviously, hopefully, the other members in the community will find it valuable to them as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Can you guys see this?
It's coming. It's there.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. All right, so this goes out to our viewers and also to Brad. This is kind of just a little base of what we're working with. The organization piece and everything isn't really here. This is just kind of so you can see what we're trying to do. So at the end of the day, yes, we want to build a community, but we want to be able to give them these tools, assets, all different types of things. Here with our tools and docs, people would be able to open them up. You have your creating an offer checklist. You click it, it opens up how to actually create an offer. We have our purpose scale. We have all different types of things. So we want to fill this with, PDFs, documents, tools that we would think would be valuable to everybody. And in addition to all the tools, we want to have our partners here, which Brad, we would love to have you in there. Obviously, right now it just says coming soon, but you'd be able to click it. They can reach out to you if they have questions or want to work or anything like that. Just a place for people to come together like that. And then our Smart Rev Exchange here, still coming soon as well. But that we want that to be a space where people can ask questions with each other or, start projects with each other, just whatever it might be. Up here, blog posts, educational libraries. Brad, a training that you went through where it says training placeholder, that would be one that they could go through. And then there'd be so many other ones. They can access all of our blogs, our podcasts. Again, this is all like super rough, but this is kind of just where we're heading. We want to be able to provide as much feedback or as much value to people as possible. So we need as much feedback as we can. So this is kind of just like where we're starting to build. Going forward, we have a form that will have a link in the description that anybody can click on, provide feedback. There's some already preset questions you can answer for us, as well as just your thoughts and everything behind it. What would you find valuable? That kind of stuff. So it's kind of where we're at right now with this. It's an early build, but we want to bring everybody together and, give as much back as we can. So this is the start of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Josh. And the community is heavily a give back for us. We're fortunate we have 30 years of intellectual property that's just been sitting on a disk.
Just
And
waiting for us.
yeah, so now we can give it away to a lot of people. There'll be some things you can get charged for, but for those people who just want to, put their toe in the water and learn a little bit, we're going to make it lots of things for you to learn about. And then as you decide you need our help or need Brad's help or need other of our partners' help, you'll know why and you'll know what you want them to do and you'll know how to go forward with them and you'll have some common language that you can communicate. So uh, the community is a give back for us, and it's a tool for our partners like Brad, so that Brad's not an HR expert, but we have people that are going to be HR experts. So when you're talking about hiring and succession planning and team building, there'll be people that can come in and work with Brad to build out the organization that can actually know how to apply theory of constraints. So we think that's going to be a powerful future opportunity. So this has been terrific. And so I'm going to ask each of us, Brad, what's the thing you'd like to leave with the audience today for them to think about or, maybe do something about?
Look, I know this is difficult for a lot of CEOs and top leaders to just say, "Hey, I want to do more, but I might need help." Generally speaking, people are put in leadership positions because they can perform. But the real question is, you know, are you performing as high at the highest level you know you can? And if you think there's a gap, why not reach out and find some help? I think one of the biggest things that we offer in the consultancy is we de-risk change, right?
Yeah.
Because we've been through it. We know what you're going to go through. And so if you really have this desire not to improve 3, 4, 5%, you want to improve 15%, 20%, 100%, then you really significantly need to change some of the things you're doing. Otherwise, most systems are built for a nice, safe 3 to 5% gain year over year over year. So if you're just one of those guys that, on the adoption curve and everything else and just say, hey, we really want to just, we want to become the next Elon Musk and just blow things up in our industry. Well, find good people. It's nice if you believe in some of the things we're doing in 3OC or what you're doing in SmartRev, then obviously you've got people available who have the history, who have the track record, who can show you, yes, we know how to do this and we know how to do this well. So it's a bit of a safety net. More importantly, we've probably encountered some of the risks or the pitfalls that you need to keep your feet out of. And we'll be there to block it for you or lay down the jacket over the water puddle for you, right? So you can cross nice and dry and things like that. But no, that's just it. If you really want to significantly make some changes, go to some experts who've done it. Vet us all. Make sure that we're the type of people, or we've got the personalities going to work with your leadership team and things like that. But again, one of the things I think what you guys are doing with this community is creating a group of people with valued tenure and things like that, and just say, yes, we're not new. We've done this before. We've worked with all kinds of situations, and you bring us in, we're going to perform for you without a doubt. And you know, the question is just how big and how high do you want to fly? So
Amen. Thank you. Joshua, what do you want to leave us with?
Just picking off of Brad, don't be scared of change. Don't be scared to reach out for help. These last couple of days myself, I've rebuilt everything we just did on a completely brand new software that I was scared to use. And, now looking at it today, it was the greatest thing I could have done because there's so many different avenues and pathways for me. And, I was afraid to use this tool for like a month now. So don't be scared to change. Don't be scared to reach out to the people who know what they're doing. Like Rick said, this is 30 years plus in the making. So you don't have to spend those 30 years going through, the pains, the trials, the tribulations, all of that. We're hopefully building it and putting it in front of you so that you don't have to go through all that and you can work with people who know what they're doing. So I'm just taking off of what Brad said. Totally agree there. I think that's all I gotta say.
Yeah, I'm going to follow in Brad's steps as well. The change that we have to do today is have to do today. Um, there was a book written in the late 90s about um, black swan events, which were considered to be events that will only, happen once in your lifetime. Well, since the year 2000, when the dot bomb occurred, we've had a black swan event about every 15 months. So if you don't think there's going to be another one, this year they were predicting three. So you have to change. And we want to make that change as safe and as profitable as we possibly can. And I love the fact that today we have Josh and the Gen Z. I'm a boomer and Brad sits in the middle of us because we all do see things slightly differently based on where we are. And the community is going to be our attempt to try and cover as many of those points of view and those skill sets as we possibly can to help anybody who wants to deal with those constant changes that are all over us. And with that, I want to say, Brad, thank you so much for being here today. This was great.
thank you.
Jo-
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
and Josh, thank you. As as always, and for laying out where the community is going. And for those of you who are in the audience, Brad's information's there. Feel free to reach out to Brad about questions or, opportunities or challenges. And the same thing for Josh and I. We're always glad to help you. And we'll be here again in another 2 weeks with the next version. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.